What are some easy to digest foods for your apocalyptic pantry? Hello, my friends. This is the art of prepping. I hope you guys are doing well today. So for SHTF, what are some foods that would be good to have around if you become very stressed out or if you're starting to have digestive issues? And this is very common when you're stressed out. So what kind of go-to foods for most people, would be recommended to have on hand? And of course, everybody's a bit different, but I've asked a number of people and I've looked at my own history with food and I've come up with this short list. These are just to get you started, just to get you thinking about certain foods over others. Obviously, there's a lot of good foods out there that are not going to be on this list that you definitely want to have in your apocalyptic pantry. But there are some foods that are just easier on the body to break down and to digest. And so let's focus on those here today. White rice. And you can store it so easily. Dried white rice is just very common. Even if you don't have a heating element to cook your rice, you can soak it in water. And after a few hours, it becomes soft enough that you can consume. White rice is really easy to break down in your stomach, and it typically is the go-to food for a lot of people when they have an upset stomach. And so it is something that you definitely want to have in your pantry. Canned pears. It's a very specific food here once again, but not everyone likes pears. I get that. But it is a good food if you can tolerate pears. It's one of those foods that kind of settles my stomach. Just don't get the canned pears that has high sugar. Get the light syrup version or the reduced sugar version, and that would be good. You probably don't want to sit there and eat the whole can of pears, but maybe have a few pieces of pears with other types of foods, and that can be an option. Another food to consider is dried oats. Dried oats. And a lot of people know this as oatmeal. I would not get the prepackaged oatmeal that has a bunch of sugar and preservatives. We're just talking about simple oats, the traditional style oats, not the instant oats. And so you can store this in airtight containers. It'll last a very long time, and it's very affordable, very affordable. And so oats, I just make sure that, to get your oats, that it is going to be free of gluten, because a lot of times certain plants, manufacturing plants, will produce various products together or side by side. And so if you have any issues with wheat, or you just prefer to avoid wheat products because of gluten, you definitely want to look for types of oats that are, been checked for gluten, so that are produced in an environment that doesn't allow gluten contamination. And so certainly oats can really soak up excess stomach acid, and just overall, it certainly calms my stomach down. I'm kind of lucky, though. I don't get a lot of stomach problems, but I do know people who do. And this is certainly a go-to food for a lot of people, especially if you're one of those people who wakes up and just because you're already stressed out because of the day ahead, for breakfast, just a very simple bowl of oats can calm you down, can settle your stomach. Powdered eggs. Powdered eggs. Now, this does come in different forms. I do believe that there's like freeze-dried eggs and dehydrated eggs, and there may be other forms that I'm not aware of, but at least those two are prevalent within the preparedness community. And yes, I have tried, freeze-dried eggs, and it does taste a little different than just fresh eggs. I mean, there is a taste difference. But eggs in general are pretty easy on the stomach. Just be mindful with any of these options not to put seasoning and lets you know for sure that seasoning isn't going to trigger any kind of stress reaction to your stomach, any kind of inflammation, or just irritate, the digestive system. So I would not put, pepper and salt and all kinds of stuff with your eggs, for example. Just try to eat it bland and simple. And what I've noticed over time, the more I remove a lot of the seasoning from my foods, the more I'm able to really enjoy the inherent flavor in the food. And eggs, even if it's freeze-dried, it has a unique flavor. It's not what I would say is like my favorite flavor. It is a flavor though. And, if you can just get used to how things are and not have to always put a bunch of sodium and a bunch of black pepper and a bunch of whatever. And I'm not saying it's wrong to put seasoning in everyday life, but in particular, if you've gotten used to just not having the seasoning, that when you do have an upset stomach or when you are trying to settle your body down, reduce inflammation and whatnot, it's going to be easier to do that. Another example is lean canned beef. And, the lean part is kind of specific because it is a lot harder for your body to break down and digest fat. Now, fat is good for you. You need fat in your diet. But when you have an upset stomach, or if you're just trying to be gentle on this digestive system, you want to kind of lower the fat content, if not kind of remove it temporarily, and just go with lean meats if you're going with meats. And so obviously you would want to mix the lean meats with other types of foods, right? You just don't want to sit there and just have leaned beef. But it definitely can be broken down and digested in a relatively easy fashion. And there's some other examples coming up just in a moment of other meats that can be other types of proteins that are very easy to digest as well. Next is dehydrated or freeze-dried bananas. Now, the thing about the dehydrated bananas is that depending on the packaging and so forth, you got maybe like anywhere from 3 to 6 months of optimum storage. Maybe on the high end, you might find some that will last a full year. And of course, you can double or triple bag and use like vacuum sealed technology to increase the longevity of like dehydrated banana chips and so forth. So you might be able to get a couple years out of it, but freeze dried is typically the best way to go. It's going to actually keep intact more nutrition, especially the vitamins, and provide a shelf storage, platform, a shelf storage timeline, I should say, of 10 years or longer. So if you can afford the freeze-dried format of bananas, that's awesome. But generally speaking, bananas is just super easy on the stomach. In rare situations, you do find some people in the population that really have an adverse reaction to bananas. And of course, you should know who that is if you're one of those. I actually have someone in my family that doesn't prefer the taste and actually kind of, I don't know if you want to call it get sick off of bananas, but they just really don't like bananas and their body kind of actually reacts to it. So I don't know if that's an allergy or what that is, but literally bananas for most people, it's very easy to digest, very calming. There's potassium in there and other good minerals. So bananas. And so what you can do with banana chips is that you can obviously just eat them as they are, as a snack, if you like a little bit of crunch, but you can soak them, in some water or in some, fruit juice. But once again, you want to be careful with, fat and sugar, when you have an upset stomach. So I would probably not do the whole fruit juice unless there's no other option, but you can simply soak in water your banana chips for a short period of time. You might want to check every 5 to 10 minutes and see when it gets to the point that, that is good for you. And you can eat it like that. So it's not going to be crunchy or hard, and it'll just be more kind of like what a banana really is, So we have that. And we also have another example here. Here's some other meat examples, or, high protein examples. Canned turkey. Canned turkey. That's a really good option. Real easy on the stomach. As well as canned salmon. Now, salmon does have a lot of good fat. Lots of good fats and oils. But when we're talking about just small portion sizes, especially if you're not feeling good and you have an upset stomach, it's not probably going to be likely that you're going to just be eating a massive amount of anything. But it is fairly easy to eat for, and break down for your stomach, at least, and digestive system wise. Salmon, good cooked salmon. And I would probably avoid the skin, even though it's very healthy for you. The salmon skin is full of good omega fatty acids and other things. But in this situation, though, you are wanting to try to minimize the fat. So you could just save the skin for maybe like your next meal if you feel better or whatnot, or just give it to someone else. Another option is canned apples. Canned apples. Now, you have to be careful on this one because there's a lot of preservatives, a lot of extra sugar that's put into these things. Sometimes there's all kinds of different flavoring, there's like cinnamons and things. Cinnamon isn't really bad for the stomach, but if you're just trying to go bland, it's not ideal. So, you kind of have to watch a lot of the things that they put into this, but you can get simple canned apples, right? I probably wouldn't go the route with like pie filling. Pie filling is going to be really sweet and over the top. But if you can, just try to find some organic canned apples, and you can also sometimes find some real simple, just plain applesauce, canned applesauce, or applesauce in some kind of container that's sealed. And those may have anywhere from a year or more shelf life. Just depends on what kind of container and how you store it. But apples are really, really easy on the stomach. In fact, I think of all the foods that I can really think of, apples and rice are probably going to be way up there at the top, in the top 10, with also, of course, bananas are very easy on the stomach. So, those are just like super gentle. But apples, man, the thing about the apples, though, it is better to eat the apple in its whole form. And I would never do the apple juice. And there are some apple sauces that it's a lot more of the apple juice than the actual fiber. So you got to be careful with some of the apple sauces, and just make sure that the apple sauces that you get, if you get that, don't actually just chop up and blend the seeds, the apple seeds, as part of the applesauce. Some companies do that. It is not recommended. There's things in the apple seed that aren't really that great for humans to consume. And so, okay, let's move on. Canned chicken. Canned chicken, another protein. We also have canned chicken broth. Very easy on the stomach. And you can have the chicken broth slightly warmed up or room temperature. Just depends on how easy that you want to make it for your stomach. And lean chicken is going to be excellent. Very easy for the body to break down. Okay, so that should be kind of a given. If you think about it, think about chicken soups, chicken noodle soups are used a lot of times for upset stomachs or people who are kind of trying to get over some kind of cold or flu. In my personal opinion, though, and from the research I've seen over the years, you want to stay away from noodles unless they're like rice noodles that you would put with your chicken. Wheat-based or gluten noodles is going to cause more inflammation and more harm and not help the overall objective here of trying to settle the digestive tract. So definitely look into canned chicken and chicken broth. Of course, when I say a lot of these things, I'm talking about just mostly shelf-stable foods here. Obviously, if you have an option to do fresh chicken, for example, and fresh broth, and you can store it like in a deep freeze, and you have the space, and if you have a deep freezer for that, that's great as well. But I'm just saying, just in case the power is out and you don't have a generator, because this is, the theme of this video is the apocalyptic pantry. So we do need to have resilience against power grid failures and all this. So I'm just going the safest route, and that is shelf stable food. So just for those who are wondering why I'm not really counting a lot of like frozen, or not including frozen foods or things like that. You can, but I'm just trying to say that the most resilient form of food really is canned, and that can be shelf stable for a long period of time. Let's move on. So we have now canned cooked vegetables. It's very important that I kind of threw that in there. Not that, vegetables are typically not cooked, because they really are. But I just wanted to kind of underline that the cooking part of vegetables really helps to break down not only just a little bit of the protein, but mostly the fiber. And it makes it that much more just digestible. So canned cooked vegetables, and I'm just going to give you 3 examples, but there's numerous others. These are the ones that I've found to be dynamite for an upset stomach, or if you're under a lot of stress, it's just really easy to get through and break down and to absorb in your stomach. I've asked a number of other people, and pretty much these same 3 keep coming up over and over and over and over. And that is going to be peas. You can get sweet peas, but if you can just get regular green peas, those are good. Probably be even better. But just generally speaking, peas are pretty easy on the stomach, on the digestive tract. Carrots. Once you take carrots and you really break it down and you put a little bit of heat to it, it helps break down that fiber enough that it isn't so difficult to absorb. But eating carrots in the raw form, uncooked, it can take a while to get through the system. They can be actually quite a difficult task. So we're not going to do that. We're doing canned carrots. Potatoes, white potatoes and sweet potatoes. If you can get that canned, you can can your own. Of course, all this stuff here, if it's canned, you can not just, buy it at a store. You can can it yourself if you have a garden, or if, let's say that you have chickens, for example, and every year you process a few chickens, when the chickens get so old that they stop laying eggs, and you can can your own chicken meat. So those are options. Okay, so we just talked about canned cooked vegetables, peas, carrots, and potatoes. And here in closing, I just want to say really just one thing, just kind of reiterate this. I've said this a few times over the years on this channel, and that is variety, variety, variety. We want to avoid palate fatigue. We want to make sure that we have different types of foods because they have different types of nutrition and different levels of energy that it can give us. And so we want to be able to kind of mix and match things, right, over time. It would be very bad if all we had was canned chicken and sweet peas and canned pears. If that's all we had, we wouldn't really have any kind of way to kind of mix that up. We'd be eating the same meal over and over and over in the apocalypse, which is not desirable. So give yourself something to look forward to. If you look at, and this is just historically, any time that there's like a more long-term disaster or crisis, emergency, historically what you find is that outside of the company of others, right? Outside of the company of others to bring you comfort and solitude and just kind of reinforcement of whatever it can be that is positive or hope. But to look forward to something besides just the company of others, you have meals. Because for a lot of people, the only thing to look forward to in the day is the next meal. And it sounds kind of crazy, but if there is calamity all around you, let's say, for example, there's a horrible, hurricane that rips through the whole region. Your whole region is literally just torn up. Like there's almost nothing left. There's no real structures that are standing. It's just like a war zone. And you may have to deal with this until the rebuild. And even if you don't want to stay to rebuild the community, you still may have to figure out how you're going to get out of that area and how to get to safety and how to restart your life. And there may be a point in time that you're just living off of rations. Maybe you were able to weather that hurricane, right, in a bunker somewhere or in the basement. Maybe you have a reinforced section of a basement that did not collapse. Maybe you're just kind of living in there, until you get assistance. Maybe you just don't have money to travel or do anything. So you just kind of have to deal with this for a period of time, weeks or months or whatever. Or maybe you're in a remote area. I don't know. Maybe you're on a ship and you're lost at sea. Or what I'm trying to get to is that it's very important. It's very important to have variety in what we do, because there is a time and point that when there's nothing else to look forward to, when it seems like everything may even be hopeless and you might even be alone. So this whole idea that you'll have companionship and others to go through the struggle together may not even be. You may be alone. And there are just countless stories that I've run into over the years that the only thing, or at least one of those, but in some cases it was the only thing that they had to look forward to and that kept them going was the next meal. And that's really kind of pretty amazing. Now, growing up, I remember looking forward to my next meal just because they were so delicious. My mom was an excellent cook. She still is, of course. She's a good cook, and but back then, she was an excellent cook. Just going about through my memories, and amazing. And so I looked forward to the meals just because it was really tasty. But I obviously had other things going on that I looked forward to, played basketball, whatever, hanging out with friends, doing, other sports. But when it comes to just the psychology of preparedness and survival, you have to give yourself opportunities to recover from devastating mental inflictions. And of course, one of those things can really be food. I mean, the life-giving source of nutrition and energy. I mean, it's an amazing thing what we do every day, eat. We do it kind of just habitually because we kind of have to, right? And we have to sustain ourselves. But what is so wild is that not only do we take that for granted, we also kind of look beyond. A lot of us don't even think about the process and how to optimize that process. A lot of us just do it because, we got to eat. And some of us get really tired of eating. Some of us are obsessed with it, though. Some of us have emotional eating issues. Some of us do not. Some of us, though, are so indifferent about food. And I think I would probably fall into one of those camps there of indifference. I sometimes just don't really think about it. When I was younger, though, I did think about it. It was always fun to look forward to the next meal because mom had some crazy stuff going on. She'd have all kinds of different foods, and they're always like, every one of them was like amazing. And you're like, how can that even be that good? It's ridiculously good. And I typically overate most meals because it was just so good. And now that mom isn't making the meals, it's been a long time though. It's been a long time since mom made the meals, but I think because I'm not such a good cook, I mean, I can hold my own. I mean, if I really have to, but because it's not always like, let's cook. I mean, I like cooking sometimes, but then there's a lot of times I'm just not hungry, or I just really am indifferent about food. And so I've noticed, though, that when I've had more difficult times in my life, and let's say that I wasn't feeling good, or I just was isolated for whatever reason. I mean, this whole pandemic has been isolating for a lot of people. So you know what I'm talking about. Every nuance of your life throughout the day becomes more important. The less that you have, and in particular, the more your day has been minimized because of whatever's going on in the world or your own personal life, however your life becomes more small. And that's what I'm saying, that sometimes our life just gets more narrow and small. And when that happens, though, the things that we do retain become more important. And I find that so interesting. I mean, every little action we do may be very important. We just don't even realize it. And that includes our meals. And within the meal, it could be certain flavors. It could be certain types of textures that satisfy us. It could be certain amounts of carbohydrates or fats or proteins. Like these all matter. And I think it is important to at least give this a little bit of attention, just to give it some time to kind of at least ponder over and maybe just look at it from a different angle and say to yourself, I know that maybe I've taken for granted, my food that I typically eat, but I'm going to try to pay a little more attention and be a little more conscious about that of which goes in my body every day. And you may be shocked that by adding a certain food that you normally don't eat, but adding it more into your diet, you might feel better. And you also might be shocked if you take something out or multiple things out. There might be a snack food that, you're kind of like addicted to, but you don't even realize like how it's messing with your body. And you might want to just say to yourself, for 1 week, I don't eat that snack. And there's a lot of people who kind of fall into two camps, typically speaking. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but you have those who are kind of in the sweet category, and those are more in the salty category. Now, I'm a salty kind of guy. I like, potato chips, for example. Not just any kind. I'm very picky, though. I mean, very few that I like. But certain types of barbecue potato chips. Now, I mean, I'll just put this out there. I don't eat potato chips, I don't do that. But I'm just saying, if I allow myself, historically in the past, I did eat potato chips, but they're totally not good for you. So I don't do that. But I'm just saying, though, that it's easy for me to fall in that trap of eating potato chips if I allow myself to. So there's a lot of salty foods like certain potato chips that really override my ability to say no. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And those people who are into sweets, it might be certain cookies or cake or pies or whatever is your temptation. And you got to be real careful. And it's really interesting, though, when you start to cut that out, if you do consume that on a regular basis, of how you may feel. Now, for some people, you may say, I don't feel that much different. But what I have noticed is that the older you are, typically you're the more sensitive to the certain foods that you eat. And I think a lot of that has to do with blood insulin resistance. How resistant or not resistant to insulin are you? And for a lot of people, at least here in America and a lot of developed world, especially all throughout Europe, there's a lot of people that are very much what you would consider pre-diabetic. And then there's obviously those people who are full-on diabetic. And really the portion of the population that are not pre-diabetic or diabetic is actually quite small. And I think that we going forward as, so-called developed countries, we're not as progressive as people say we are when it comes to our diet. We're kind of more like a disaster, in the making. But it seems like all this processed and hyper-processed foods that we're cramming down our throats, it just elevates the amount of people with pre-diabetes and diabetes. And we need to be very mindful of that process, because I think that's one of the more, of all the issues out there, it's one of the top issues that we can avoid. We can avoid all this. We can avoid type 2 diabetes. And it's very important that we avoid that, because that's one horrible thing to have to deal with when there is a collapse in society, if we ever get to that point. Hopefully not. Hopefully we never get there, but it does seem like there's a lot of instability in the world right now, and it wouldn't take that much for certain, at least regions of the world, to collapse, or at least temporarily not function. And so I think more so than ever, our health needs to be really examined. I mean, how healthy are we? Are we doing things on a regular basis that really are not good for us? And it's like, there's a lot of things though that it doesn't hurt us if we do it once or twice, or even once or twice a month, really even. But it's like when you do it on a regular basis, it has horrible effects. I was just reading an article. I mean, it makes complete sense. I kind of already knew most of this, but I just thought it was an interesting article about tech neck, and even more or less like tech shoulder, tech back, all these things about tech and how it's affecting our bodies. And basically how, a lot of us are on our phones or smart devices so much that we're kind of hunched over. And a lot of us are having all kinds of poor posture, muscle tension that normally is not there. We're using our fingers in ways that are giving us carpal tunnel. I mean, there's just all kinds of problems. I've personally been having a little bit of shoulder issue because I find myself holding my phone in a certain way for a long period of time. And I'm like, seriously, I got to stop this, And so when possible, to give yourself a break from technology. And I mean, like at least a couple days at a time, like a couple days out of the week, to literally just use it very little or none at all, if that's even possible. But when I've tried, and I'm just going to put this out there, and I know this video is more about foods that are easy to digest, but this is just as a bonus. This is bonus content here. I've noticed it's very difficult to get away from technology because we have integrated in our lives. We have integrated it in our lives so much that it's almost like we're cyborgs. Some people really do call us now. We're like cyborgs in the sense that we have these wearables or these carry-along items, these devices like phones, our smartphones. I mean, they're with us so much, and they're typically in contact with us so much, like literally in contact with our bodies, that it's like part of us. And then when you don't have them around, or if you aren't using them for a period of time, you start feeling weird, as if you're not exercising a part of your own body. I mean, do this experiment. And if you haven't done this for a while, like forget your phone, right? Go to the grocery store and just leave your phone at home. See how well you do. This has happened to me a couple times this past month that I just had a lot on my mind. And before I left the house, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to top my phone off so I have a full charge before I go out and get my groceries, and maybe I'll go hit the bank or whatever, get some gas, just kind of do a few things while I'm out. Well, because I'm trying to get going and I got distracted doing some other things, I left the house with the phone still charging, and it wasn't brought with me to do my errands, in particular to get groceries. And let me tell you, I didn't even get that far. Maybe a mile. I don't even think it was a mile. And then I realized, because I look over and I'm like, no phone. Where's my phone? And it's not like I had like a panic, but it almost felt like I was starting to panic. But I was like, oh, wow, this is bad. And then you start thinking, what happens if this happens, or this, all the what ifs. What happens if my car breaks down, or if I get robbed, or I have a medical emergency? I'm going to need the phone. Like all these things that you're trying to tell yourself you need the phone for. Of course, there's a bulk of my life. I mean, I'm of the age that still more than half of my life, I never had a phone. Well, because there's some obvious reasons. It wasn't even around when I was, quite young, but just for the fact that for over half my life, I wasn't into this habit of being codependent with some type of technology, and especially something like a phone or a wearable. And I will say, though, that I really don't like this codependency that I have. I know I have it. I know that most of us have it. We really do. Because, once again, just try to purposefully leave like a smart device, in particular your phone, a cell phone at home, and leave and go somewhere for a while. In particular, if you're going to be gone for at least an hour or more, you're going to probably feel at the very minimum uncomfortable, and at the most you might panic. Like literally you could have a panic attack. There are people who report that, being a few miles from home only to realize they left their phone at home, at home, and then they literally have a panic attack. And so hopefully, you and I won't get to that level, but this is kind of where things are. And so just to kind of recap here, it's important to have foods that's easy to digest. It's important to have different types of food, have variety. And it's important to be aware of how our environment and the things that we interact with on a regular basis, how those things manipulate us or contribute to various things of how we function. And, when people talk about the apocalypse, a lot of times, at least in recent years, I've noticed this. It's like there's this romanticizing that goes on. People like to romanticize the collapse of society. Now, I think it's just horrible to really think about your society not functioning, like a real collapse. That is like something that I do not desire and I would not romanticize. But you see this on various levels in movies, in various chat spaces on the internet, in books. You sometimes just hear a conversation between two friends about, I can't wait until, an EMP drops on the country so that we can go back to easier, simpler times. And I just shake my head because I don't think people really understand the magnitude of real SHTF or apocalyptic outcomes. I think that either people are really ignorant about how devastating and how deadly it would be, or they literally have not given it enough time. And once again, it still goes back to ignorance. Or they are so foolhardy that they are wishing their own demise. So at some point, you'd have to say that maybe these people are suicidal on some level. Maybe they're not even aware of it. Maybe they've already given up on their life or the world. And because of that, they don't even recognize what they're wishing on the world. They're wishing it upon themselves and the world. And that's very disturbing if you ask me. So I think that we need to be strong in our approach to weather the problems that come ahead. And if we ever have to deal with horrific things, another world war or whatnot, and whatever comes with all that, that we'll have at least some ability to function, because we have some stored food, because we've gone through our needs and we have some options to satisfy those needs. And that mentally we're prepared, at least on some level, because these thoughts are not new. Just knowing the possibility of very bad things can actually give you some peace when it happens. It's not going to be pleasant when it happens, but it isn't going to be a complete shock to the system. And so this is kind of where some people say, boy, you sure sound like you practice stoicism, And, a stoic is someone that really, there's different definitions, but there's pretty much brutally honest about how, just crazily insane, just the magnitude of horror that can come about in your everyday life, even though most of the time it never happens. Like 99% of the time, whatever you fear the most never happens. That's just typically how it works. But Stoicism says if you just go ahead and accept even your darkest fears, and you come to peace with that possibility, that if it happens, that if your fears ever do happen, then you would be somewhat ready. But then at the same time, that 99+% of the time, your worst fears won't happen. And so every day will be somewhat of a surprise and won't be anywhere near what you've accepted that it could happen. So it's almost like every day is a gift, and like it's just a welcome surprise. Because if you have, like, for example, no expectation that so-and-so will do anything. Let's say, for example, you have a family member and they don't really carry their weight. They're just kind of dead weight in the sense that they don't have any motivation. They don't typically contribute to the family or nothing. It's just this person in the family that just kind of gets away by doing the very minimum. Now, if you just accept that they are someone that contributes nothing and they are dead weight, and you just assume, and that's how you look at things, that if they ever did contribute, if they ever did anything, it would be a welcome surprise, and it would just be a bonus, right? It would just be a bonus. And that's, I think, a good way, even though it seems a bit dark and negative. What you're not wishing for anything negative. It's just a type of way to prepare mentally for the world and for those around us. And so you still you could have hope, and you can have optimism, and you can have everything. But if you're aware, and if you've accepted the possibility of very bad things, and when they typically never happen, and maybe you'll be lucky and they will never happen in your entire life, maybe it's not just 99% of the time they don't happen, maybe they never happen, then you could view your whole life as a gift that exceeded your expectation. Because when you set the bar, and I know this sounds in contrary to how a lot of us were raised. I know that I was always raised like have these massive dreams and all. And I mean, you can still have those big goals and all, and those are not always bad. But if you literally set the bar super low and you expect almost nothing from anyone, then can you imagine like all the surprises that you would have every day all through your life? You'd just be like in shock almost that, in a good way, that so-and-so did that or said that, or that you were able to accomplish all of this, right? And so it's like and instead of putting all this pressure on ourselves, and that's what we typically do, we don't always call it that. We call it, once again, having goals and these timelines. But what we do, though, is we put pressure on ourselves. And it wears on us over time, because you have these so-called standards. And most people would say, well, hold on now, what's wrong with having a standard? Inherently, there's nothing wrong until you actually look at how it affects you. And if it tears you down over time because it brings more stress on you, and it tears you down more than it builds you up, then it's not a good thing. So there are a lot of people that the Stoic way, and I do adopt this to a large degree, but being stoic and just saying, wow, I have pretty much no expectations today. There's a lot of really bad things that could happen, and I acknowledge that, and I accept it. And I'm just going to see what I can do today. And what I've noticed is that I do so much more, and I exceed all expectations. More so than if I had this massive list that is ongoing for days, weeks, months, or maybe even years. Now, don't get me wrong. I still do a very short list just to outline my week of things that would be kind of nice to do and finish. But I don't put great pressure on myself. I just say those are things that would be cool to do, and just to kind of write them down to get it out of my head. And if I get around doing those things, it's awesome. But this is what I've noticed. The less pressure I put on myself, the more I do, because I'm not so worn out and spent from all that pressure, you see. And so a lot of us tear ourselves down more than we build ourselves up. And so I would encourage you to be organized, right, and prepared, but don't position yourself to be worn down by the mechanisms that you think are building you up and giving you so-called the opportunities to succeed. Because in society these days, these so-called organizational success methods are actually very problematic. And so I would encourage you to get yourself into some momentum in the beginning of the day and maintain the momentum. And you might be shocked of what can come from that. Just staying in motion. Staying in motion. Do a little now. Do a little bit here. Do a little bit there. Build on it. Build on it. And you might be blown away what you can do in one waking day. And this is going to be much better than having this crazy list that micromanages every 15, 20 minutes of your day. This is a lot better of a technique. And trust me, I have tried all this over the years. When I was in college a number of years ago, it's almost like a distant dream. It's been just long enough now that I don't remember all of it super clear because it's been not really a long time by most people's measure, but it's been enough time that's passed that, you're not really thinking about it very much. And so when you do think about it, it's kind of like, wow, that happened a long time ago, in my context, at least. And I can say this. When I was in college, and this is kind of how it is for a lot of people in college, you have a daily planner. And I used that daily planner to help me keep track of what class I had to go to that day and what time I needed to be at work and what time I'm supposed to meet up with friends and what time do I have to go and get groceries and whatever else I needed to do. And I had this planner that planned out my life pretty much every day of the week, even on the weekends. Literally, it was like in 15-minute increments. From the moment that I woke up until I went to bed, there was 15-minute increments. And because I am, the way I am, at least the way I was at the time more so, I like to fill in all those spaces. Because I felt like, you know what, it doesn't make sense to have open space. If it's my day, I want to fill up the day. And so I thought that plugging in things and filling up this planner every day was the definition of living. And now that I'm older, I don't do that. I don't do a daily planner. I do have a wall calendar, but I don't really even use it. It's just there to look at, just to reference the day, for the week, just to know what day it is. But I don't sit there and write a bunch of stuff in the planner. Like I said before, I typically have in my phone a little note. I have like a note that I type out to myself, and I just give me a general parameter of a few things. Typically, it's about no more than a handful of things that I want to do in the next week. And so by giving myself flexibility, I typically finish all those things within the first day or two of the week, which is so cool because a lot of times before, when I got real rigid with all this, I'd only do certain things on certain days, and then I'd wait and do other things on the next day. And I really dragged things out. And I spent so much time trying to organize or thinking that I was being organized that in the time that I was trying to organize, I could have finished a bulk of the things that I was wanting to do. And I think that's really incredibly important to also point out that a lot of us plan too much. Now, there are some people who don't plan at all. That's a problem. But there are some of us, especially those who are into preparedness, that we overplan a bit. Let's just be honest. And if we took some of that planning time back, think about those hours and hours over the years that we sit around and thought about plans, and we could have actually been doing something that was a lot more productive. And I'm not saying sitting around planning things isn't productive or aren't good objectives at certain times in your life, but I'm just sitting here saying there are times to plan and then there's times to do things physically. And I would encourage you to look at how you spend your time. How do you spend your time? And is it efficient? Does it even make sense? Are you just wasting time? Are you burning time? There's a lot of times these days I have quite a bit of free time, and I find myself going, wow, what am I going to do today? Of course, there's always a whole list of things I could come up with very easily. I mean, there's really never a situation, if I'm honest with myself, that I could say to myself, oh, there's nothing to do. I'm really bored. No, that's not even really possible, I don't think, really for any of us, if we were to be completely brutally honest. But there's a lot of times I like to say, well, I don't want to do these things, but I don't mind doing these things. And so that's what I'll typically do. Like today, there's some organization in the house that needs to be done. I'm not really wanting to do it. I'm trying to find a way to put it off and just put it off to tomorrow. But I do know eventually I'll probably will get around to it. But there's a lot of people who say this. I mean, it's somewhat true. You know, I think actually it's more true than not. When you feel like it's I don't know if you want to call it the worst time, but if you feel like it's the least efficient time to do something, you might be surprised and find that it's actually the best time to do something. Now, I'm not sure really why that is. I really don't. But there's so many times that I didn't want to do something, but I kind of forced myself only to find that I was really into it once I got started. And so this is kind of how it is for me with organizing my house, or just finding a room in the house for a lot of people and just saying, this room is all I'm going to do today. And maybe even tomorrow too. You're just going to dwell in this room and you're just going to work with this room and you're going to put things where it needs to be and you're going to do what you need to do. And that's what I found is sometimes you just got to start, starting something. I always say the first step is half the battle or whatever they say, but that's pretty much what, is true. It's, you got to get the first step, in place so that the next step can happen. And you got to just get that momentum and then it all comes together. But the thing about a lot of us, what we do is that we try to plan this optimum time to do something when really there is no such thing as an optimum anything for the most part. It's just what we think. It's like an idea, it's like, okay, we think that there's this perfect time. And then you can extrapolate that into really big life changes. Like I hear this all the time with friends, it's not really the best time to have a child. And I'm thinking to myself, well, when is it a good time to have a child? You're always going to be in the midst of something, right? You're always going to have bills. You're always going to have some kind of stress going on in life. You tell me when it's best. Now you could make the argument, and and then it's valid that it's not really the best idea for a lot of reasons, more so than others, to have a child when you're extremely young. I totally get that. Like if you're a teenager, that's not really the best time to have a child. I don't think it is. I'm not saying it's completely wrong, but I'm just saying if you're 18, 19, 20, it can be kind of difficult to have a child, especially if you're just still in school or if you got a really low paying job or, obviously there's some obvious stuff there. But what I'm here to tell you is that there may be sometimes like some very obvious cases like what I just stated about when you should do something, but most of the time there really isn't an ideal time. Not in the way that we kind of fantasize about. And so a lot of times we just have to learn to adapt, right? It's more about adapting than trying to micromanage our life and hyper plan out everything. So that's difficult for a lot of people though. And I've noticed that with those who are into preparedness that we like to kind of hold on to control as much as possible, right? There's a lot of preppers that have fear of going hungry, fear of whatever. I mean, there's a million fears out there, and preppers are quite outward about their fear. And there's a reason why they're motivated so much more than the general population, I believe, to prepare, because they may have experienced some of those hardships, or they may have seen it happen to other people and they don't want to be a victim, or they're just very educated and very, well, let's just say high IQ, and they can put one and one together. That if there's something that looks wrong, then they want to make some changes or to prepare for it so they're not going to fall victim to whatever is going to happen potentially. So, I think that there are some so-called preppers that have mental illness, just like in the general population. There's people that are paranoid, about, and they believe every conspiracy theory and all that. And then there's preppers that are so, what you would call level-headed. They're just so put together so well. They're put together very well. And they're so balanced. I like that. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's a balance. And they're so balanced that it's all very obvious of why they do what they do. And I think that we definitely need to pay attention to those people because they have struck a balance, and a lot of us haven't got to a balance. Some of us are balanced in some ways, but pretty much everyone has something that they struggle with. So I don't want to say that everybody, or at least some people out there, have everything figured out, because they don't. But there are certainly some people who have gotten a bunch of it figured out, and I'm not talking about just within preparedness, but I'm just talking about living life. They have struck a balance that they can function and they have harmony with what they do, and they're okay with their decision making. They can accept their decisions, and they don't have to worry about all this second guessing and hyper planning and trying to find the best time to do anything. They can roll with things really well. They're very versatile. They adapt. And that's kind of missing in society to a large degree. I see that a lot, that people are so rigid. I deal with that sometimes. I don't like sometimes to feel like that someone's manipulating me or controlling me. And I think this is another reason there's a lot of preppers that are we're not antisocial. I'm very social. I like to talk to all kinds of people. There are certainly some preppers that are a bit antisocial, but just like the general population, there's different kinds of preppers. But I think that more so than not, preppers in general are a bit more suspicious, and they are a bit more careful about some of their social interactions because they know the power within communication. And they know that one thing leads to another. And because of that, there's inherent issues that can come about, positive and negative. And so I think that we need to look at the big picture, but not get stuck and think that the big picture is all there is. Because once you start to zoom in on any part of that big picture, you'll see that there's another world down there. It's almost like if you were a bird and you were flying way up in the sky, and the bird looks down and it sees these little dots, right? And those little dots are houses way down below. So if the bird was just to stay up there all of its life, then it would never know what those little dots were. They wouldn't know that they were buildings. They didn't know that there were creatures that lived in those buildings. They wouldn't know any of it. But because those birds sometimes fly down to the surface to get food or to interact with other birds or whatnot, they know that there's stuff down there. They know that there's a difference than what they see from above. And so this is kind of like a metaphor really for a lot of us that are living life, that a lot of us get stuck seeing the world in our life in just one way. And a lot of us don't even take the time to focus in and see the details of what we're missing or what is even happening. A lot of us take for granted so much. I mean, so much. Everything from a really good job to the fact that you can go to a grocery store in most areas and get food. There isn't a food shortage in a lot of places. Now, I think personally that we will have food shortages going forward if we have another lockdown, but I'm just saying at the moment, there's still food available. People just take for granted that we can just pick up this little device that we call a cell phone and just make calls to people around the world, or that we can just look things up. I mean, these things are amazing, and they haven't always been around. And relatively speaking, a lot of this stuff is quite new. And that what we take for granted is so large anymore. You almost kind of wonder, how is it that we're going to advance in the future if we don't even acknowledge how good we have it now? It's almost like I kind of wonder if technology will stagnate, because I don't see sometimes the level of appreciation or wonder or awe of what we even have. Now, I do believe that we will continue to innovate on some level, but I think there are times that we peak out for a time period. And I could see that possibly happening in the future. We kind of peak out with technology for a little, we cool down until we see that there's so much more potential. because we're so used to just assuming that things are going to get better with technology and new things are always going to come out. And of course they typically do, and they almost always have. But it's not a given though. It doesn't always have to be that way. It could be the opposite. We could lose technology. We could lose information. I mean, things can happen. And in this video and in the context on this platform on YouTube, there are some examples I would like to give you about some of those situations that could unfold in the near future that could take away a large I don't know how else to say it, but a large portion of how we live. It takes away society in various ways. But I can't really tell you and talk to you about this. These are forbidden topics on YouTube. But just look at what's unfolding right now and look at the potential for a fallout of what is being pushed right now. And you pretty much know what I'm talking about. I think you understand. If you follow anything, you know what's up. There is a great possibility in the next few years of great collapse in how society is going to function, because there could be a lot less people that are going to be around. And if you look at very interesting proportional distributions of the population, it actually doesn't take that much to really hinder society and to cause a regression of society by taking out 20 to 30% in most developed countries because of all the specialties that are present. You only take 20 to 30% of the workforce out of commission and society comes to its knees. That's how fragile society is. And it could be certain people who work in tech. It could be certain type of doctors or specialists. It could be lots of specialists. But if something happens and those people are not around anymore, you can take down a society. And this is one of my greatest fears in the near future. And I mean near future, like in the next 2 to 5 years kind of thing, that there will be a fallout because of the things going on right now. And so it is a time period, though, to consider how much more can we be prepared? What else do we need? How self-sufficient are we currently? This is a question that some people ask, but I think more people need to ask it. How long can you endure if you were to be isolated from the world from here on out? Or if your society that you live in, even your community, was just locked down, like you just had to stay on your property or in your home from here on out, how long could you do that? And then we've talked about this over the years in just small ways, but I do want to put that question back out there. I think it's a really good time for that. It's a good time to literally ponder your limitations so that you can expand upon those and be that much more robust and to be that much more flexible so that you can overcome the adversity that I do see it's coming. So you guys take care. Thanks for checking this video out. I'll talk to you later.